The blood-red sunset painted the horizon as Faith Blackburn stood on her porch, rifle in hand, watching the lone figure approaching through the swirling dust. For 5 years, she had lived in solitude on the edge of Silver Peak, Colorado, and strangers were never welcome, especially not ones who cast shadows as long as this one did. The spring of 1876 had been unusually dry in this part of Colorado territory. Faith's small homestead, nestled against the foothills about 2 miles outside of Silver Peak, had weathered the seasons like she had with stubborn resilience. The 2-room cabin, barn, and modest corral represented everything she had built alone since she'd claimed this land after her parents died in the influenza outbreak of '71. As the figure drew closer, Faith raised her Winchester rifle to eye level. The man was enormous, well over 6 feet tall with shoulders as broad as an ox. His dark Stetson was pulled low, obscuring his face, but she could see he was carrying something bundled in his arms. The small buckskin horse trailing behind him looked exhausted, its head hanging low. "That's far enough," Faith called out when he was within earshot. Her voice, rarely used these days except to speak to her animals, sounded strange to her own ears. "State your business." The man stopped, his massive frame swaying slightly with fatigue. He slowly lifted his head, revealing a weathered face with several days' growth of beard. But what caught Faith's attention were his eyes, blue as a summer sky and filled with a desperate kind of pleading. "Madam," he said, his voice deep but gentle, "I don't mean no trouble. My name's Adam Newcomb. I've been riding for 2 days straight." He shifted the bundle in his arms, and Faith realized with a start that it was a baby. "My little girl here is sick with fever. Our canteen ran dry hours ago. Can we stay just one night? I'm begging you." Faith's finger tensed on the trigger. She had rules, hard rules that had kept her alive and independent. No visitors, no attachments, no complications. "There's a town just 2 miles down the road," she replied coldly. "Silver Peak has a doctor." "I know, madam, we're coming from there." The man, Adam, looked down at the tiny bundle. "Doc Stevens said he can't help her. Said she needs rest, cool compresses, and his medicine. Said the town's too noisy with the saloon and all. He recommended a quiet place where she could recover." He looked up, meeting Faith's eyes directly. "Said there was a woman living out this way who might have room." Faith cursed under her breath. Old Doc Stevens knew better than to send strangers her way. Yet she couldn't help noticing how the man cradled the child, how his massive hands were so gentle around the tiny bundle. "Please," he added, his voice breaking slightly. "It's just for tonight. By morning I'll be gone." Faith hesitated, the rifle still trained on him. The dying sunlight caught the gleam of moisture in his eyes. Was that a tear? The thought of a man that size crying over a baby made something shift inside her, something she thought had hardened years ago. "How old is she?" Faith found herself asking. 8 months. His expression softened when he glanced down. "Her name's Emma." As if on cue, a weak cry emerged from the bundle, and Faith's resolve crumbled slightly. She lowered her rifle a fraction. "You got any weapons on you?" "Just my revolver." He nodded toward the holster at his hip. "I can leave it out here if you want." Faith considered this for a long moment. "No," she finally said. "Keep it. These hills have mountain lions." She stepped back, opening the door wider. "You can stay in the barn. There's fresh straw and blankets. I'll bring water and some broth for the baby." Relief washed over the man's face. "Thank you, madam." "I won't forget this kindness." "It's not kindness," Faith replied sharply. "It's just for the child, and it's just for tonight." As Adam led his horse toward the barn, Faith went inside and leaned her rifle against the wall, wondering what she'd just done. 5 years of carefully constructed solitude, and she'd let a stranger, a giant of a man with sad eyes, and a sick baby breach her defenses with nothing more than a plea. While heating broth on the cookstove, Faith watched through the window as Adam unsaddled his horse and carried his daughter into the barn. There was something in the way he moved, a careful deliberateness that belied his size, that held her attention. Most men she'd known who were built like him used their stature to intimidate. This man seemed almost apologetic for the space he occupied. Faith filled a pitcher with water. gathered a bowl of broth, some clean rags, and a small jar of willow bark tea she kept for fevers. She hesitated, then added a slice of bread from the loaf she'd baked that morning. The barn smelled of hay and horses. Faith's own mare, Penny, nickered softly from her stall as Faith entered. In the corner, Adam had arranged a makeshift bed of clean straw covered with a blanket from his saddlebag. He sat beside it, his large frame hunched over as he unwrapped the baby from her swaddling. The child was flushed with fever, her wispy blonde hair damp with sweat. She whimpered when Adam touched her forehead. "Here," Faith said, setting down her supplies. "Let me see her." Adam looked up, surprised, but moved aside. Faith knelt beside the baby, placing her palm gently against the hot little cheek. Emma's eyes fluttered open the same striking blue as her father's and regarded Faith with feverish confusion. "She's burning up," Faith murmured, dipping a rag in cool water. "How long has she been like this?" "3 days now." Adam's voice was rough with worry. "Started as just a cough. By yesterday she was like this, couldn't keep nothing down." Faith nodded, wringing out the cloth and placing it on Emma's forehead. "We need to cool her down, then get some of this willow bark tea in her, little by little." She glanced at Adam. "Doc Stevens gave you medicine?" Adam reached into his pocket and produced a small brown bottle. "Said to give her 3 drops every 4 hours, said it would bring down the fever." Faith uncorked the bottle and sniffed it. The familiar bitter scent of quinine filled her nostrils. She nodded. "This will help. Has she had any yet?" "Last dose was about 3 hours ago," Adam replied, watching intently as Faith roulette the cloth and began bathing Emma's flushed arms and legs. "Good, we'll give her more in an hour." Faith worked methodically, her movements practiced and sure. She'd helped her mother tend to her younger brothers during their illnesses before they'd all been taken by the influenza. The memories caused a familiar ache in her chest. "You know what you're doing," Adam observed quietly. Faith didn't look up. "I've dealt with fevers before." They worked in silence for a while, Faith cooling Emma's tiny body while Adam watched anxiously. Gradually, the baby's feverish whimpering quieted and her breathing became more even. "Try giving her some broth now," Faith said, rising to her feet. "Just a few drops at first. If she keeps that down, give her a little more." Adam nodded, dipping his finger in the broth and bringing it to Emma's lips. The baby accepted it, then opened her mouth slightly for more. "That's it, little one," he murmured, his deep voice softening to a tender rumble. "That's my brave girl." Faith turned away, uncomfortable with the intimacy of the moment. "There's bread there for you. I'll come back in an hour with the next dose of medicine." "Miss," Adam called as she reached the door. "I don't know your name." Faith paused, her hand on the latch. She rarely gave her name to anyone these days. Names led to familiarity, and familiarity led to complications. "Faith," she said finally. "Faith Blackburn." "Thank you, Miss Blackburn, for everything." She nodded once, then slipped out into the growing darkness. Back in her cabin, Faith paced restlessly. The presence of strangers on her property, even in the barn, unsettled her carefully ordered world. She found herself listening for any sound from outside, half expecting trouble despite the man's apparent genuineness. An hour later, she returned to the barn with a lantern. Adam was still sitting beside Emma, his back against the wall, massive legs stretched out before him. The baby was sleeping more peacefully now, her cheeks less flushed. "She's taken most of the broth," Adam reported as Faith knelt to check Emma's temperature. "And kept it down too." Faith nodded, relieved to find the child cooler to the touch. "The fever's breaking, that's good." She measured 3 drops of the quinine mixture into a spoon and gently parted Emma's lips. The baby grimaced at the bitter taste but swallowed obediently. Faith followed it with a dropperful of willow bark tea, which Emma accepted more readily. "You have a way with her," Adam observed. "She usually fusses something fierce with medicine." Faith shrugged. "Babies know when something's helping them." She corked the bottle and stood. "She should sleep better now. The worst is past, I think." Adam exhaled deeply, running a hand through his dark hair. In the lantern light, Faith noticed for the first time how exhausted he looked. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and several days' worth of beard stubbled his jaw. His clothes were travel-worn and dusty. "When did you last sleep, Mr. Newcomb?" she asked. He gave a humorless laugh. Properly. Not since she took sick. He glanced down at Emma. Couldn't rest, not with her burning up like that. Faith hesitated. Everything in her screamed to maintain distance, to retreat to her cabin and lock the door. But the man looked ready to collapse, and if he did, the baby might roll off her makeshift bed. I can watch her for a while, she heard herself say. You should get some sleep. Adam looked up, surprise evident in his weary face. I couldn't ask that of you. You didn't ask, I offered. Faith settled herself on a nearby hay bale. I'll wake you if she needs anything. He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to understand her motives. Faith kept her face carefully neutral. Thank you, he finally said, stretching out his large frame beside Emma's bed. Just for an hour or so. Faith nodded, positioning her lantern to cast enough light to see the baby but not shine directly in Adam's face. Sleep, Mr. Newcomb. You're no good to your daughter if you're dead on your feet. Within minutes, Adam's breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep. Faith watched as his features relaxed, the worry lines around his mouth and eyes softening. In repose, he looked younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, not much older than her 26 years. Emma stirred, making a small sound, and Faith automatically reached to adjust the blanket over her. The baby's tiny hand closed reflexively around Faith's finger, and an unexpected wave of emotion washed over her. It had been so long since she'd touched another human being, since she'd allowed herself to be touched. Faith sat motionless, unwilling to disturb either father or daughter. The quiet of the night settled around them, broken only by the occasional soft nickering of the horses and the rhythmic breathing of the sleeping pair. Despite her vigilant nature, Faith found herself relaxing in the peaceful tableau. She hadn't realized she dozed off until a change in Emma's breathing woke her. The baby was stirring restlessly, her little face scrunched in discomfort. Faith quickly checked her forehead, still cooler than before, but the fever hadn't completely broken. Carefully extracting her finger from Emma's grip, Faith roulette the cloth and placed it on the baby's forehead. Emma's eyes fluttered open, regarding Faith with solemn curiosity. "Hello there," Faith whispered, smoothing back the damp wisps of blonde hair. "Feeling a bit better, are we?" Emma blinked slowly, then reached up a chubby hand toward Faith's face. The gesture was so innocent, so trusting, that Faith felt something crack open inside her chest, a sealed chamber she'd thought permanently closed. "You're a brave little thing," Faith murmured, allowing Emma to pat her cheek with surprising gentleness. "Fighting so hard." She gets that from her mother. Faith startled at Adam's voice. She turned to find him watching them, his blue eyes soft with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "I'm sorry," she said, straightening up. "I didn't mean to wake you. You didn't." He sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I've gotten used to sleeping light since Emma came along." He reached out to touch his daughter's cheek. "How is she?" "Better, I think." "The fever's down, though not gone entirely." Adam nodded, relief evident in his face. "That's something, at least." He looked up at Faith, his expression serious. "I can't thank you enough for this, Miss Blackburn. Most folks wouldn't take in strangers, especially not out here." Faith stood, brushing hay from her skirt. "As I said, it's just for tonight. I should get back to the house." She hesitated. "There's a pump outside if you need water. The outhouse is behind the cabin." "We'll be gone by midday tomorrow," Adam promised, "once I'm sure Emma's well enough to travel." Faith nodded, picking up her lantern. "Good night, Mr. Newcomb." "Adam," he said softly. "Please call me Adam." Faith paused at the door, not looking back. "Good night, Adam." Sleep eluded Faith that night. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the familiar sounds of her homestead, now altered by the knowledge that she wasn't alone. The weight of another adult presence, a male presence on her property, made her hyper-aware of every creak and rustle. When the first light of dawn filtered through her curtains, Faith abandoned any pretense of sleep and rose to begin her chores. The chickens needed feeding, Penny needed watering, and the vegetable garden needed attention. The routines that had structured her solitary life for 5 years would not be disrupted by temporary visitors. She was collecting eggs when she heard the barn door open. Adam emerged, Emma bundled in his arms, looking much improved in the morning light. The giant of a man stood uncertainly in the yard, as if unsure of his welcome in the daylight. "Morning," he called when he spotted Faith by the chicken coop. "Hope it's all right if we get some air. The little lady seems to be feeling better." Faith nodded, depositing the last egg in her basket. "The fever's broken then?" "Seems so." Adam approached, adjusting Emma in his arms so Faith could see her. The baby's cheeks were no longer flushed, and her blue eyes were bright and curious as they took in Faith's face. "She even took some milk this morning." "Good." Faith found herself oddly pleased by this news. "She'll need to build her strength back up before you travel." Adam nodded, his expression turning thoughtful. "About that, I was wondering if we might impose on your hospitality for one more day. Just to make sure she's fully recovered before we hit the trail." Faith stiffened. "We agreed on one night, I know, and I'm a man of my word." Adam shifted Emma to his other arm, the movement gentle despite his size. "But after seeing how you were with her last night, I'd feel better knowing she had another day to rest up. I can pay you," he added quickly. "I've got money." Faith frowned. "I don't need your money." "I could help around your place," he offered. "I noticed your fence could use some mending, and that barn roof has a weak spot." Faith followed his gaze to the section of fence that had been trampled by a deer last month and the corner of the barn roof that leaked whenever it rained. She'd been meaning to fix both, but some tasks were difficult to manage alone. "I'm good with my hands," Adam continued when she didn't respond, "and it would ease my conscience about imposing." Faith hesitated. The man seemed genuine in his offer, and in truth, Emma did look like she could use another day of rest. The practical benefits of having a strong pair of hands to help with repairs were also undeniable. "One more day," she finally conceded. "You fix the fence and the roof, and you can stay until tomorrow morning." Relief washed over Adam's face. "Thank you, Miss Blackburn, you won't regret it." "Faith," she said abruptly, "if you're staying another day, you might as well use my given name." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his rugged features. "Faith, then." He adjusted Emma in his arms. "I'll get started on that fence right after breakfast, if that's all right." Faith nodded, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look after her restless night and early morning chores. She smoothed a hand over her unruly auburn hair, tucking loose strands back into her braid. "I've got some cornmeal mush on the stove," she said, gesturing toward the cabin. "Not much, but it'll fill your stomach." "That's mighty kind," Adam replied, following her toward the house. "Emma and I appreciate it." Inside the cabin, Faith busied herself at the cook stove, uncomfortably aware of how Adam's large presence seemed to shrink the room. He sat at her small table, Emma on his lap, looking around with open curiosity. "You've made a nice place here," he commented, nodding toward the neat shelves lined with preserves and the curtains Faith had sewn from flour sacks. "Very homey." "It serves its purpose," Faith replied, setting a bowl of mush before him. "There's molasses if you want it." Adam nodded gratefully, shifting Emma to one arm while he ate with the other. The baby watched the spoon with interest, opening her mouth like a little bird when it passed. "Want some, do you?" Adam chuckled, dipping his finger in the mush and offering it to Emma. She sucked it enthusiastically, making small sounds of contentment. "She's got an appetite this morning," Faith observed, allowing herself a small smile. "That's a good sign." "Best sign I've seen in days," Adam agreed, his voice warm with relief. "Yesterday I was afraid." He trailed off, his expression momentarily shadowed. "Well, it doesn't matter now. She's on the mend, thanks to you." Faith shook her head, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "I only did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Adam said quietly, his blue eyes meeting hers. "Most would have sent us on our way." Faith looked away, moving to wash the cooking pot. "Where are you headed?" she asked, changing the subject. There was a brief pause before Adam answered. "North. Got some prospects up around Laramie." "That's a fair distance," Faith remarked. "Traveling alone with a baby isn't easy." "No, it isn't," Adam agreed, "but we manage." He helped Emma with another taste of mush, been managing since her mama died last winter. The matter-of-fact statement hung in the air between them. Faith continued washing dishes, unsure how to respond. Loss was something she understood all too well, but she'd never been one for offering sympathy or receiving it. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her back still turned. "Thank you," Adam replied simply. "Caroline, my wife, she got the consumption, wasted away over months, but fought hard till the end." His voice grew softer. "Emma was only 3 months old, too young to remember her mama, but I tell her stories every night." Faith turned, drying her hands on her apron. Adam's face was composed, but the pain in his eyes was raw and familiar, the same pain Faith saw in her own reflection sometimes. "My parents and brothers died of influenza 5 years ago," she found herself saying, "within 2 weeks of each other." Adam nodded, understanding without pity in his gaze. "That's why you're out here alone." It wasn't a question, but Faith nodded anyway. "Easier that way." "Is it?" Adam asked gently. Faith didn't answer. She turned back to her dishes, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "The tools are in the shed behind the barn," she said after a moment. "Help yourself to whatever you need for the repairs." "I appreciate that." Adam finished his mush and stood, settling Emma against his shoulder. "I'll get started right away." Faith watched from the corner of her eye as he left, his massive frame ducking slightly to clear the doorway. The cabin seemed strangely empty after he'd gone, as if his presence had filled a void she hadn't recognized before. Shaking off the unsettling thought, Faith returned to her chores. There was bread to bake, mending to do, and garden rows to weed, the same tasks that had structured her days for years. The presence of temporary visitors wouldn't disrupt her routine. Yet throughout the morning, Faith found her attention drawn to the yard, where Adam worked steadily on the broken fence. He'd fashioned a small pallet in the shade of an oak tree, where Emma lay contentedly playing with a wooden spoon Faith had given her. Every few minutes, Adam would pause in his work to check on the baby or speak to her in low, affectionate tones that carried on the breeze. There was something mesmerizing about watching such a large, powerful man be so gentle with such a tiny being. Adam's hands, which easily drove fence posts into the hard ground, would delicately adjust Emma's blanket or tenderly stroke her cheek when she fussed. By midday, the fence was repaired and Adam had moved on to the barn roof. Faith brought out a pitcher of water and some leftover biscuits, telling herself it was simply the decent thing to do for someone working in the hot sun. "Thought you might be thirsty," she said, setting the tray on a stump near the ladder. Adam climbed down, wiping sweat from his brow. "Much obliged," he said, pouring a cup and drinking deeply. "Water tastes better when you've earned it." Faith nodded, glancing toward Emma, who was now sleeping peacefully in the shade. "She seems to be doing well." "Right as rain," Adam agreed, following her gaze. "Whatever you did last night worked wonders." He hesitated, then added, "She likes you." Faith felt a flush creep up her neck. "Babies that age like anyone who feeds them." Adam chuckled, the sound surprisingly light coming from such a big man. "That's not entirely true." "Emma's got opinions about people. Wouldn't let the preacher's wife in Silver Creek hold her for love nor money." Faith found herself smiling despite her best intentions. "Smart child." "That she is," Adam agreed, his face softening with pride. "Takes after her mother that way." Caroline could size up a person with one look. He studied Faith for a moment. "She would have liked you." The comment caught Faith off guard. She busied herself adjusting the water pitcher, unsure how to respond. "I should let you get back to work," she finally said. "I've got bread in the oven." Adam nodded, not seeming bothered by her awkwardness. "I'll have this roof patched before sundown," he promised. "Looks like rain tomorrow." Faith glanced at the cloudless blue sky. "You can tell." "My left shoulder aches when rain's coming," Adam explained. "Has ever since I broke it falling off a horse when I was 16, more reliable than any weather vane." Faith found herself curious despite her resolve to maintain distance. "Have you always worked with horses?" "Mostly," Adam replied, leaning against the ladder. "Grew up on a horse ranch outside of Cheyenne, worked as a wrangler then a farrier until I met Caroline." His expression grew distant. "She was a school teacher. Smartest woman I ever met, could quote Shakespeare and do figures in her head faster than any man with a pencil." Faith could hear the love in his voice, the reverence that hadn't faded despite his loss. It stirred something in her, a longing she'd thought long buried. "What about you?" Adam asked, interrupting her thoughts. You always lived in these parts, Faith shook her head. Came from Missouri originally. My father moved us west after the war looking for a fresh start. She hesitated, then added, he built this cabin, started the farm. After he and the others died, I just stayed alone, Adam said softly. Faith straightened her shoulders. I prefer it that way. Adam studied her face for a long moment, his blue eyes disconcertingly perceptive. Do you prefer it, I mean? The question was gentle but direct, piercing through the careful armor Faith had constructed around herself. For a brief, disorienting moment, she couldn't remember why she'd chosen this solitary existence, why she'd pushed away the neighbors who'd tried to help after her family died, why she'd rebuffed the well-meaning attempts at friendship from the women in Silver Peak. I should check the bread, she said abruptly, turning away. Faith, Adam called softly after her. She paused but didn't look back. Thank you for the water and for everything else. Faith nodded once, then hurried back to the safety of her cabin. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity as Faith threw herself into her chores with unusual vigor. As if physical exertion could drive away the unsettling thoughts, Adam's presence had stirred. She baked not only bread but also a berry cobbler, using the last of her preserved blackberries from the previous summer. She told herself it was simply because she had the ingredients that needed using, not because she'd noticed Adam's appreciative glance at the molasses jar that morning. From her window, she could see him working on the barn roof, his movements efficient and sure despite his size. Occasionally, he would climb down to check on Emma or hold her for a while, talking to her in that gentle rumble that somehow carried across the yard. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Faith heard Adam's boots on the porch steps. A moment later, a light knock sounded at the door. Come in, she called, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. The door opened, and Adam entered, ducking his head slightly beneath the doorframe. Emma was nestled in the crook of his arm, wide awake and alert, her blue eyes immediately finding Faith across the room. Roof's all patched, Adam reported. Should hold through any storm now, and I reinforced that weak spot in the chicken coop while I was at it. Faith nodded, surprised and a little touched that he'd noticed the loose boards she'd been meaning to fix. Thank you. Least I could do. Adam shifted Emma in his arms as the baby began to fuss. Someone's getting hungry, he explained with a small smile. We'll head back to the barn and get out of your hair. Faith hesitated, glancing at the pot of stew simmering on the stove and the fresh loaf of bread cooling on the counter. It was more than she needed for herself, and the thought of Adam and Emma eating cold food in the barn suddenly seemed wrong. I made stew, she said abruptly. Enough for all of us. You could eat here, if you want. Adam's eyebrows rose in surprise, but pleasure warmed his face. We'd like that very much, wouldn't we, Emma? He bounced the baby gently, eliciting a gurgle of agreement. Faith nodded, turning back to the stove to hide the flush she felt creeping up her cheeks. It's nothing fancy, just rabbit stew. Smells wonderful, Adam said, settling into a chair at the small table. It's been a while since we've had a home-cooked meal. The simple statement reminded Faith of the reality of their situation, a widower traveling alone with an infant, eating whatever could be managed over campfires or purchased in town. It couldn't be an easy life. As Faith ladled stew into bowls and sliced the fresh bread, she found herself watching Adam with Emma. The baby was getting fussy with hunger, and Adam was trying to calm her while fishing in his pocket for what appeared to be a small cloth pouch. Here, Faith said, setting down the ladle and approaching them. May I hold her while you prepare her food? Adam looked up, surprise evident in his face. You wouldn't mind, I offered, didn't I? Faith held out her arms. Adam carefully transferred Emma to Faith's waiting hands. The baby stiffened momentarily at the exchange, her little face scrunching up in preparation for a cry. Faith adjusted her hold, cradling Emma against her shoulder and patting her back gently. There now, she murmured. Your papa's just getting your supper ready. No need for all that fuss. To her surprise, Emma relaxed against her, one chubby hand coming up to pat curiously at Faith's cheek. Those solemn blue eyes, so like her father's, studied Faith's face with an intensity that seemed beyond her 8 months. She likes you, Adam said softly, echoing his earlier observation as he mixed milk powder with water from Faith's kettle. Usually takes her longer to warm up to folks. Faith found herself smiling at the baby despite her best intentions. We've been properly introduced now, haven't we, Emma? She said, bouncing the child gently. That makes all the difference. Emma responded with a toothless grin that created an unexpected flutter in Faith's chest. How long had it been since she'd held a child? Not since her youngest brother had fallen ill 5 years ago. The memory brought a familiar pang of grief, but it was tempered somehow by the warm weight of Emma in her arms. Adam finished preparing the milk and held out his arms to take Emma back, but Faith shook her head. I can hold her while you eat, she offered. Your stew will get cold. Adam hesitated, then nodded gratefully. If you're sure, I'm sure. Faith settled into a chair, adjusting Emma on her lap. Show me how to feed her. Adam demonstrated how to hold the cloth pouch, which functioned as a makeshift bottle with a corner that Emma could suck on. Caroline made these, he explained softly. Said it was better than using a spoon when we were traveling. Faith nodded, carefully positioning the milk-soaked cloth for Emma, who latched onto it eagerly. Your wife was resourceful. She was, Adam agreed, his voice warm with memory rather than heavy with grief. He began eating his stew, watching Faith and Emma with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. This is delicious, by the way. Faith nodded acknowledgement of the compliment, her attention focused on Emma's eager feeding. The baby's tiny hand came up to grip Faith's finger, holding on with surprising strength as she nursed from the cloth. They ate in companionable silence, broken only by Emma's occasional contented sounds. Faith found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't around another person in years. There was something soothing about Adam's presence, a steadiness that didn't demand conversation or performance. When Emma finished her milk, Faith automatically lifted her to her shoulder, patting the tiny back until a small burp emerged. Adam watched with approval. You've done this before, he observed. Faith nodded, memories washing over her. I helped raise my younger brothers after my mother's health declined. The youngest was just a toddler when. She trailed off, the familiar grief closing her throat. Adam reached across the table, his large hand coming to rest near hers, not touching, but close enough to offer comfort without intrusion. I'm sorry, he said simply. Faith nodded, grateful he didn't press for more details or offer empty platitudes. Emma squirmed against her shoulder, drawing her attention back to the present moment. I think she wants to explore, Faith said, adjusting her hold as Emma twisted to look around the cabin. Adam chuckled. She's curious about everything these days. Started trying to crawl last month, but mostly just scoots backward. As if to demonstrate, Emma pushed against Faith's chest, her little legs kicking with determination. Faith carefully set her on the floor, keeping a supporting hand on her back as the baby found her balance sitting up. Emma immediately reached for a wooden spoon that had fallen nearby, grasping it in her chubby fist and bringing it to her mouth with a look of intense concentration. That's her favorite thing to do with any object she finds, Adam explained with a fond smile. Everything gets tasted. Faith found herself smiling back. Seems like a sensible approach to life. Adam's laugh was unexpected and warm, filling the small cabin. I never thought of it that way, but you're right. He gazed at his daughter with obvious adoration. She's teaching me to see the world differently every day. The simple honesty of the statement touched something in Faith. She'd spent 5 years seeing the world as a place of loss and danger, a place to be defended against rather than experienced. Emma's approach, reaching out, exploring, tasting life, seemed suddenly, startlingly appealing. Does she look like her mother? Faith asked softly. Adam's expression gentled. Her eyes are all mine, but her smile, the shape of her face, that's Caroline through and through. He watched as Emma abandoned the spoon in favor of scooting toward Faith's skirts. And that determination. Pure Caroline, woman never gave up on anything in her life. Except living, Faith said before she could stop herself. She immediately regretted the words, horrified at her own insensitivity. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. No, Adam interrupted gently. Don't apologize, you're not wrong. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. Caroline fought harder than anyone I've ever known, but in the end her body gave out before her spirit did. He looked directly at Faith, his blue eyes holding hers. She made me promise 2 things before she died, to tell Emma about her every day and to keep living myself really living, not just surviving. The words struck Faith like a physical blow. Wasn't that exactly what she'd been doing these past 5 years? Surviving, not living. Emma chose that moment to grasp Faith's skirt, pulling herself up to a wobbly standing position. Her little face beamed with triumph as she bounced on unsteady legs, holding tight to the fabric. "Would you look at that?" Adam said softly, pride evident in his voice. "She's never done that before." Faith felt an unexpected surge of emotion as she steadied the baby with a gentle hand. "She's strong," she murmured, "like her mother," Adam said, "and like you." Faith glanced up, startled by the comparison. Adam was watching her with an expression of quiet admiration that made her cheeks warm. "You don't know anything about me," she protested softly. "I know enough," he replied. "I know you've faced terrible loss and kept going. I know you live out here alone and have made a good life for yourself despite the challenges. I know you took in strangers when you had every reason not to." His voice softened. "And I know you're gentle with my daughter, even though you've built walls to keep the rest of the world at bay." Faith felt exposed, as if Adam had somehow seen through the carefully constructed defenses she'd maintained for years. She looked down at Emma, who was still holding onto her skirt, bouncing happily. "I should clean up," Faith said abruptly, needing to put distance between herself and the perceptiveness in Adam's gaze. Adam nodded, not pressing the issue. He stood and scooped Emma up from the floor. "We'll head back to the barn, let you have your space. Thank you for the meal." Faith nodded, not trusting her voice. As Adam moved toward the door, Emma in his arms, the baby looked back over his shoulder at Faith, her little face suddenly crumpling in distress. She reached out a hand toward Faith, making unhappy sounds of protest. Adam turned, surprised. "Well, now, seems someone's not ready to say goodnight." He bounced Emma gently. "It's all right, little one, we'll see Miss Faith in the morning." But Emma was having none of it. Her protests grew louder, tiny face reddening with effort as she strained toward Faith. "She's probably just tired," Faith said, though she felt an odd flutter at the baby's obvious attachment. "Maybe," Adam agreed, though he looked unconvinced. "Or maybe she's gotten used to having you around." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you mind holding her for just a minute? Might calm her down before we go." Faith nodded, wiping her hands on her apron before accepting the squirming baby. Emma immediately settled against her, one hand clutching Faith's collar, the other patting her cheek with surprising gentleness. "She likes touching faces," Adam explained softly, "especially people she feels safe with." Faith swallowed past the sudden tightness in her throat. How long had it been since anyone had felt safe with her? Since she'd allowed anyone close enough to feel that way? Emma yawned widely, her eyelids growing heavy as she nestled against Faith's shoulder. Within moments, her breathing deepened into sleep, her tiny body growing heavier in Faith's arms. "She's exhausted," Adam whispered, watching his daughter with tender eyes. "The fever took a lot out of her." Faith nodded, carefully adjusting Emma's position to make her more comfortable. The baby sighed in her sleep, one hand still clutching Faith's collar. "I can take her now," Adam offered, holding out his arms. Faith hesitated, reluctant to disturb the sleeping child. "She might wake if we move her." Adam nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You're probably right." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by Emma's soft breathing. Faith was acutely aware of Adam's presence, of the intimacy of the moment, the three of them standing in her small cabin as if they were. She cut off the thought before it could fully form. "I should put her down," Faith said quietly. "Let her sleep while we finish cleaning up." Adam nodded, following as Faith carried Emma to her own bedroom. With careful movements, she laid the baby in the center of her bed, surrounding her with pillows to prevent her from rolling off. "She'll be all right there for a little while," Faith whispered, backing away from the bed. "We can check on her while we clean up." Adam nodded, following Faith back to the main room. They worked together in silence, clearing the table and washing the dishes. Faith was surprised by how easily they fell into a rhythm, Adam washing while she dried. their movements complementary despite never having done this together before. "Thank you," Adam said softly as they finished, "for everything, for taking us in, for helping Emma for the meal." He gestured around the cabin, "For sharing your home." Faith nodded, uncomfortable with his gratitude. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing," Adam replied, his voice gentle but firm, "not to us." Faith looked up, meeting his gaze directly for the first time that evening. The warmth and sincerity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "I should check on Emma," she said, breaking the moment. In the bedroom, Emma still slept peacefully, her tiny chest rising and falling with even breaths. Faith stood watching her for a moment, an unfamiliar ache growing in her chest. "She's beautiful," she whispered when she sensed Adam behind her. "Yes," he agreed, his voice equally soft. "Sometimes I look at her and can't believe she's real, that something so perfect could exist in this world." Faith understood the feeling. After so much loss, so much darkness, the presence of this tiny, perfect being seemed like a miracle, a reminder that life continued, that beauty still existed. "It's getting late," Adam said after a moment. "I should take her back to the barn." Faith bit her lip, looking at the sleeping baby. The thought of them going out to the barn, even though it was perfectly comfortable, suddenly seemed wrong. "You could stay," she heard herself say. "Here, I mean, in the house." She gestured toward the small sitting area with its comfortable chair. "You could take the chair and Emma could stay in the bed. It might be better for her being inside." Adam's expression was unreadable in the dim light. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose more than we already have." "I'm sure," Faith replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "It's just for tonight." Adam nodded slowly. "Thank you." Faith nodded, then slipped from the room to gather extra blankets. When she returned, Adam was standing by the bed, looking down at his daughter with an expression of such tender love that Faith felt like an intruder witnessing it. "Here," she said softly, holding out the blankets. "These should keep you warm enough." Adam accepted them with a grateful smile. "I've slept in much worse places than a comfortable chair in a warm cabin," he assured her. "This is luxury compared to some of the places Emma and I have bedded down." Faith nodded, trying not to think about the hardships the two of them must have faced on the road. "Well, good night then." "Good night, Faith," Adam replied softly. "Sleep well." Faith retreated to the small pallet she'd made for herself near the stove, aware that this was the first time in 5 years she'd shared her home with another person overnight. Strangely, the thought didn't fill her with the anxiety she might have expected. Instead, there was an odd comfort in knowing she wasn't alone in the darkness, that just a few feet away, a father and daughter slept peacefully under her roof. The night passed uneventfully, and Faith woke at her usual early hour to find Adam already awake, sitting in the chair with Emma in his lap. The baby was babbling softly, patting her father's face with obvious delight. "Morning," Adam said quietly when he noticed Faith stirring. "Hope we didn't wake you." Faith shook her head, sitting up and smoothing her hair. "I'm always up at dawn." She glanced toward the window, noticing the gray light filtering through. "You were right about the rain. Looks like it's coming." Adam nodded, rubbing his left shoulder absently. "It'll be a soaker." Started aching something fierce around midnight. Faith stood, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill. "I'll make coffee." As she moved about the kitchen, heating water and measuring coffee grounds, Faith was aware of Adam watching her, though his attention remained primarily on Emma. The baby seemed fully recovered, her cheeks pink with health rather than fever, her movements energetic and playful. "She's much better," Faith observed as she set the coffee to boil. "Thanks to you," Adam replied, his voice warm with gratitude. "Doc Stevens was right to send us your way." Faith shook her head. "The medicine did the work, I just provided a place to rest." "You provided more than that," Adam said quietly. "Much more." Faith busied herself with breakfast preparations, uncomfortable with the emotion in his voice. She mixed cornmeal batter for flapjacks, added the last of her dried berries, and heated her cast iron skillet. "We'll head out after breakfast," Adam said, bouncing Emma on his knee. "Try to make some miles before the rain gets heavy." Faith nodded, ignoring the unexpected pang the words caused. Of course they were leaving. That had always been the plan. One night extended to two. Nothing more. Are you sure that's wise? She found herself asking. With the rain coming, Adam looked up, surprise evident in his face. We don't want to impose on your hospitality any longer. It's not about that, Faith said quickly. It's just traveling in the rain with a baby who's just recovered from fever. It might not be the best idea. Adam studied her face for a long moment. Are you offering to let us stay another day? Faith hesitated, unsure of her own motives. Was she genuinely concerned for Emma's health, or was there something else, some reluctance to return to her solitary existence now that it had been briefly interrupted? Until the rain passes, she finally said. That would be sensible, wouldn't it? A slow smile spread across Adam's face, warming his blue eyes. Very sensible, he agreed, and very kind. It's not kindness, Faith insisted, turning back to her flapjacks. It's just common sense. Of course, Adam replied, though she could hear the smile in his voice. They ate breakfast together, Emma sitting on Adam's lap and happily gumming small pieces of flapjack that Faith had cooled for her. The baby kept looking at Faith with a wide, gummy smile that made something warm unfurl in her chest. After breakfast, Adam insisted on helping with the dishes again. It's the least I can do, he said when Faith protested. Besides, Emma enjoys watching us work together. Indeed, the baby sat contentedly on a blanket on the floor, playing with a wooden spoon and occasionally looking up to observe their movements with obvious interest. She's very observant, Faith noted, handing Adam a plate to dry. Takes everything in, Adam agreed proudly. Going to be smart as a whip like her mama. Faith glanced at him, noting the ease with which he spoke of his late wife now with love and remembrance rather than raw grief. You must miss her very much, she said softly. Adam nodded, his hands stilling on the plate. Every day, but it's different now than it was at first. The missing has changed shape. He looked down at Emma, who was happily chewing on the spoon handle. Having Emma helps. She's a part of Caroline that lives on, you know, Faith nodded, understanding. She had nothing of her family that lived on just memories and a handful of possessions that grew more distant with each passing year. What will you do in Laramie? She asked, changing the subject. Adam hesitated before answering, focusing on drying another plate. I've got a friend there who owns a livery, says he could use a good horseman. He glanced at Faith. It would be steady work. A place to raise Emma proper-like with a roof over her head and other children around as she grows. Faith nodded, trying to picture it. Adam and Emma settled in a town, building a life together. It seemed right somehow. A child needed stability, community. That sounds like a good plan, she said sincerely. Adam looked at her for a long moment. What about you, Faith? Do you plan to stay here forever? Alone? The question caught her off guard. No one had asked about her future in years, perhaps because the answer seemed obvious to everyone in Silver Peak. Faith Blackburn was the strange, solitary woman who lived out by the foothills and kept to herself. That was who she had become, who she had chosen to be after the devastation of losing her family. I haven't thought much about it, she admitted. This is my home. A home can be many places, Adam said gently. My pa used to say home isn't the land or the house, it's where the people you care about are. Faith fell silent, considering his words. Once, her home had been defined by the presence of her parents and brothers. After their deaths, she'd redefined it as this cabin, this land, a place where she needed no one and no one needed her. It had been easier that way, safer. The sound of rain starting to fall on the roof saved her from having to respond. Emma looked up at the noise, her little face registering surprise. Sounds like that storm has arrived, Adam observed, setting down the last plate. Glad we're not out in it, Faith nodded, grateful for the change in subject. We're due for the rain, the garden needs it. As the morning wore on, the rain fell steadily, drumming on the roof and streaming down the windows. Faith found herself oddly content with the enforced idleness and unexpected company. Adam proved to be a skilled whittler, producing a small wooden horse for Emma from a scrap of wood Faith had been saving for kindling. Emma divided her attention between the toy and Faith, occasionally crawling over to pat Faith's knee or offer the wooden horse for inspection. Each time, Faith found herself smiling at the baby, drawn in by her innocent overtures of friendship. "She's taken quite a shine to you," Adam observed as Emma once again made her way across the floor to Faith. Faith helped the baby pull herself up to standing, holding onto Faith's skirts for balance. "She's easy to like," she admitted. "Takes after her pa that way," Adam said with a wink that made Faith flush despite herself. The day passed with surprising ease, the three of them confined to the small cabin by the steady rain. Faith found herself relaxing in Adam's presence, drawn into conversation about everything from horse breeding to the best way to preserve summer vegetables. He was well-spoken and thoughtful, quick to laugh and slow to take offense, qualities Faith had forgotten could exist in the same person. By evening, when the rain showed no signs of letting up, Faith didn't even question that Adam and Emma would spend another night inside. It seemed the natural order of things now, as if they had always been there. After supper, with Emma asleep on Faith's bed again, Adam and Faith sat by the fire. The silence between them was comfortable, broken only by the crackle of flames and the steady drumming of rain. "Thank you," Adam said softly after a while, "for letting us stay." Faith nodded, her eyes on the fire. "The rain made it necessary." "Is that the only reason?" Adam asked, his voice gentle. Faith looked up, meeting his gaze. There was something in his blue eyes, a question, a hope that made her breath catch. "What other reason would there be?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adam held her gaze steadily. "Maybe you've grown as fond of our company as Emma has of yours." Faith looked away, unable to deny it but unwilling to admit it aloud. "You'll be leaving soon enough," she said instead. "Once the rain stops." "Yes," Adam agreed softly, "unless there was a reason to stay." The implication hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Faith stared into the fire, her heart pounding in her chest. How had this happened? How had this man and his daughter slipped past her defenses so quickly? "I've been alone a long time," she finally said. "I'm used to it." "Being used to something doesn't mean it's what you want," Adam replied. "Or what's best for you?" Faith looked up at him sharply. "And you think you know what's best for me, a man who met me 3 days ago?" Adam shook his head, not rising to her defensive tone. "I don't presume to know what's best for you, Faith. Only you can decide that." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "But I know what I've seen these past days, a woman with so much to give, so much love to offer, keeping herself apart from the world out of fear." "Not fear," Faith protested. "Practicality, self-preservation." "Maybe it started that way," Adam conceded. "After what you lost, who could blame you for wanting to protect yourself?" His voice softened. "But walls that keep out pain also keep out joy, Faith. I learned that after Caroline died." Faith stared at him, struck by the simple truth of his words. Hadn't she built her solitary life specifically to avoid feeling the kind of devastating grief she'd experienced when her family died? And in doing so, hadn't she also prevented herself from experiencing anything else? Friendship, connection, love. "I don't know how to do anything else anymore," she admitted, her voice small. "This is who I've become." Adam shook his head gently. "No, this is who you've chosen to be. You can choose differently." Faith looked away, overwhelmed by the possibilities his words suggested. "Why are you saying these things to me?" Adam was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and sincere. "Because in these few days I've come to care for you, Faith Blackburn, and I hope you might feel something for us too, for me and for Emma." Faith closed her eyes, unable to deny the truth of his words. Against all odds, against all her careful rules and boundaries, she had developed feelings for this gentle giant of a man and his sweet baby daughter. The realization terrified her. "You're going to marry me," she reminded him and herself. "You have plans." "Plans can change," Adam said simply, "or expand to include new possibilities." Faith opened her eyes, studying his face in the firelight. "What are you suggesting, Adam?" He met her gaze steadily. "I'm suggesting that maybe the reason Doc Stevens sent us to your door wasn't just for Emma's fever. Maybe it was for all of us, a chance meeting that could change 3 lives." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I'm not asking for promises, Faith, just a chance." A chance to see if what I feel growing between us could be something worth exploring. Faith's heart hammered in her chest. And if it isn't, then I'll go to Laramie as planned, grateful for the kindness you showed us when we needed it most. Adam's voice was gentle but certain. But I think it could be. I think there's something here worth staying for, worth fighting for. Faith stared into the fire, emotions warring within her. Fear of loss, of vulnerability, of opening herself to the possibility of grief again. But alongside it, something else was growing hope. Hope that perhaps there was more to life than mere survival. Hope that the walls she'd built could be dismantled without destroying her. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Adam reached across the space between them, his large hand covering hers with gentle warmth. You don't have to say anything tonight, just think about it. The rain's supposed to last another day at least, according to my shoulder. He smiled softly. We have time. Faith nodded, not trusting her voice. Adam squeezed her hand once, then released it, rising to his feet. I should check on Emma, he said, his voice returning to normal conversational tones. And let you get some rest. Faith watched him go, her hand still warm where he'd touched it, her mind whirling with possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider in years. The next morning dawned gray and wet, the rain still falling steadily. Faith woke to find Adam already up, heating water for coffee while Emma played contentedly at his feet. The domestic scene struck her with unexpected force. How natural it looked, how right it felt to have them in her kitchen. Morning, Adam greeted her with a warm smile. Hope you don't mind me starting the coffee. You looked peaceful sleeping, and this little lady was ready to start her day. Faith shook her head, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I don't mind. She knelt beside Emma, who immediately crawled toward her with a delighted gurgle. Good morning to you too, little one. Emma reached up, clearly wanting to be held. Without hesitation, Faith lifted her, settling the baby on her hip as naturally as if she'd been doing it for months rather than days. Adam watched them, something soft and hopeful in his expression. You're good with her, he observed. She trusts you completely already. Faith brushed a kiss against Emma's soft hair before she could think better of it. The baby snuggled against her, one hand coming up to pat Faith's cheek in what felt like approval. I've been thinking about what you said last night, Faith said quietly, not looking up from Emma. Adam stilled, waiting, and Faith took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I don't know if I can be what you and Emma need. I've been alone so long, I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else. You remember, Adam said gently. I've seen it these past days. The way you care for Emma, the way you talk with me. He moved closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could feel his warmth. The heart doesn't forget how to love, Faith. It just needs permission to try again. Faith looked up, meeting his gaze. I'm afraid, she admitted. Afraid of losing again, of feeling that pain. Adam nodded, understanding in his eyes. I know that fear. I lived with it every day after Caroline died. Still do sometimes when I look at Emma and realize how much I have to lose. His voice softened. But I've learned that the fear of loss shouldn't keep us from embracing what life offers us. The joy is worth the risk. Faith looked down at Emma, who was contentedly playing with the collar of Faith's nightdress. This tiny being had already worked her way into Faith's heart in just a few days. The thought of saying goodbye to her, to both of them, created an ache Faith hadn't expected. I don't know what happens next, she confessed. This isn't something I planned for. Adam smiled gently. The best things in life rarely are. He hesitated, then asked, would you consider coming to Laramie with us, starting fresh somewhere new? Faith's eyes widened. Leave here, my home, Adam nodded. It's a lot to ask, I know, but Laramie is a growing town, good people there, according to my friend. You could sell this place, start something new. His eyes held hers. With us, if you wanted. Faith glanced around the cabin, the home her father had built, where her family had lived and died, where she'd hidden away from the world for 5 years. Could she leave it? Did she want to? Or I could stay, Adam said softly when she didn't respond. Here, I mean, Silver Peak needs a good horseman too, I'd wager. He ran a hand through his hair. I'm not asking for certainties, Faith, just possibilities. Emma chose that moment to reach for her father, clearly wanting to be transferred to his arms. Faith handed her over, watching as Adam cradled his daughter with such natural tenderness. I need time, Faith said finally. It's all happening so fast. Adam nodded immediately. Of course. Take all the time you need. His smile was warm, without pressure. We're not going anywhere until this rain stops anyway. The day passed in a strange limbo of domesticity and anticipation. Faith went about her indoor chores, mending, baking, sorting through her stores while Adam entertained Emma and helped where he could. The easy rhythm they fell into was both comforting and terrifying to Faith. How quickly it would be to get used to this to them in her life. By evening, the rain had finally begun to taper off. Faith stood at the window, watching the clouds break apart to reveal patches of clear sky. Looks like it's clearing up, she observed as Adam joined her, Emma asleep in his arms after her evening feeding. Yes, he agreed quietly. Should be fair traveling weather by morning. Faith nodded, her heart heavy with the implication. Morning would bring decisions, choices that would shape the rest of her life. I'll put her down, Adam said softly, nodding toward the bedroom where Emma had slept the past 2 nights. Faith watched him go, then turned back to the window. The setting sun had broken through the clouds, painting the rain-washed landscape in golden light. Her father's land, looked beautiful and peaceful in the evening glow. For 5 years, this place had been her sanctuary and her prison. She'd built a life here, surrounded by memories of what she'd lost. But was it truly a life, or just an existence, a holding pattern born of grief and fear? Adam returned, moving to stand beside her at the window. Beautiful evening, he commented. Everything looks so fresh after the rain. Faith nodded, not trusting her voice. They stood in silence for several moments, watching the sunset paint the western sky in vibrant pinks and golds. Whatever you decide, Faith, Adam said finally, his voice gentle, I want you to know these days have meant the world to me and to Emma. You've reminded me what it feels like to be part of something again, to share a home, not just occupy a place. Faith turned to look at him, struck by the sincerity in his face. You've reminded me too, she admitted softly, of things I thought I'd forgotten. Adam's expression warmed, hope kindling in his blue eyes. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he reached for her hand. Faith let him take it, his large fingers enveloping hers with gentle strength. I don't know what tomorrow brings, Adam said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. But I know what I hope for. Faith's heart pounded in her chest as she looked up at him. In the golden evening light, his face was open and earnest, his eyes filled with an emotion she hadn't seen directed at her in years. Without thinking, she reached up with her free hand to touch his cheek, feeling the rough texture of his beard beneath her fingers. Adam leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly. When he opened them, the intensity of his gaze made Faith's breath catch. May I kiss you, Faith? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Faith hesitated only a moment before nodding, her hand still resting against his cheek. Adam leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, but Faith didn't want to change her mind. For the first time in years, she wanted to move forward, not backward. His lips touched hers with exquisite gentleness, a question rather than a demand. Faith answered by stepping closer, her hand sliding from his cheek to the back of his neck. The kiss deepened slowly, a careful exploration rather than a passionate rush. When they finally parted, Faith felt breathless and alive in a way she hadn't in years. I want to try, she whispered, the words emerging before she'd fully formed the thought. I'm still afraid, but I want to try. Adam's face lit with a joy that made Faith's heart swell. That's all I'm asking, he said, his hands framing her face with tender reverence. Just a chance to see what we might build together. Faith nodded, a tentative smile forming on her lips. I don't know if I want to leave here yet, she admitted. This land, this home, it's all I've had for so long. Then we stay, Adam said simply, for as long as you need. There's no rush, Faith, we have time. The words were a gift, the gift of patience, of understanding. Faith felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the realization that this man was offering her not just love, but the space to find her way back to herself. Thank you, she whispered, letting him pull her into an embrace that felt like coming home. That night, after checking on Emma one last time, Faith made a decision. Instead of making up her pallet by the stove, she brought an extra blanket into the bedroom, spreading it on the floor beside her bed where Emma slept. "What are you doing?" Adam asked from the doorway, surprise evident in his voice. Faith looked up at him, her heart pounding with nervousness and determination. "I thought we could both be near her tonight, in case she needs something." Adam's expression softened with understanding. He nodded, moving to help her arrange the makeshift bed. When it was ready, they lay down side by side, not touching but close enough to feel each other's warmth in the darkness. "Good night, Faith," Adam whispered. Faith reached out, finding his hand in the darkness. "Good night, Adam." As she drifted towards sleep, Emma's soft breathing above them and Adam's hand warm in hers, Faith felt something unfurl in her chest, something that had been tightly wound for 5 long years. It felt like possibility. It felt like hope. It felt, just maybe, like the beginning of love. Morning came with clear skies and birdsong. Faith woke to find Emma sitting up in the bed, looking down at her with a delighted grin. Adam was already up, his place beside her empty but still warm. "Good morning, little one," Faith said, reaching up to lift Emma from the bed. The baby came willingly, settling against Faith's chest with a contented sigh that filled Faith's heart. She found Adam in the kitchen, frying bacon and brewing coffee. He turned when he heard them enter, his face lighting up with a smile that made Faith's heart skip. "There are my girls," he said warmly. The words, the easy inclusion, the suggestion of belonging brought a flush to Faith's cheeks and a flutter to her stomach. She hadn't been anyone's girl in a very long time. The thought that she could be, that she and Emma could be his girls, was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Breakfast is almost ready," Adam continued, seemingly unaware of the effect his casual words had on her. "Thought I'd make myself useful while you were sleeping." "You looked so peaceful, I didn't want to wake you." Faith nodded, adjusting Emma on her hip as the baby reached curiously for her father. "It smells wonderful." They ate breakfast together, the 3 of them, with an ease that belied how new their situation was. Emma divided her attention between them, accepting bites of softened bacon from her father and sips of milk from Faith with equal enthusiasm. "I was thinking," Adam said as they cleared the dishes together, "that I should ride into Silver Peak today. Let Doc Stevens know Emma's recovered and see about finding some work locally." He glanced at Faith. "If that's all right with you." Faith nodded, a warm feeling spreading through her chest at the knowledge that he was planning to stay at least for now. "That sounds like a good idea. I could use some supplies too, if you wouldn't mind picking them up." Adam smiled, clearly pleased by her practical acceptance of their new arrangement. "Make me a list and I'll get whatever you need." Faith wrote out her list: flour, sugar, coffee, a few other necessities while Adam saddled his horse. Emma fussed when she realized her father was leaving, crawling after him with determined speed. "It's all right, little one," Adam soothed, scooping her up for a goodbye kiss. "Papa will be back before you know it. You stay here with Faith and be a good girl." Emma looked unconvinced, her lower lip protruding in a pout that Faith found unreasonably adorable. "We'll be fine," Faith assured him, taking Emma into her arms. "Won't we, Emma? We have chickens to feed and bread to bake, very important business." Emma's attention was diverted by Faith's braid, which she grabbed with curious fingers. Adam chuckled, leaning in to kiss his daughter's cheek. "I'll be back by sundown," he promised, then hesitated, looking at Faith with a question in his eyes. Understanding his unspoken request, Faith tilted her face up. Adam's kiss was gentle and brief, mindful of Emma between them, but it sent warmth spreading through Faith's entire body. "Be safe," she whispered as he mounted his horse. Adam nodded, touching the brim of his hat. "Always am, especially now that I have something precious to come back to." Faith watched him ride away, Emma waving her tiny hand in farewell. As they turned back toward the cabin, the baby still securely in her arms, Faith was struck by how different everything looked this morning. The same land, the same buildings, the same chores awaiting her, but all transformed by the knowledge that she was no longer facing them alone. For 5 years, Faith Blackburn had lived in solitude, her heart closed off to protect itself from further pain. Then a giant cowboy with a sick baby had appeared at her door, asking for shelter for just one night. Now, as she carried Emma inside to begin their day together, Faith knew that one night had changed everything. The day passed quickly, filled with the ordinary tasks that had structured Faith's life for years, now made extraordinary by Emma's presence. The baby proved to be a curious and enthusiastic companion, watching Faith's every move with bright interest and offering happy babbles of commentary. Faith found herself talking more than she had in years, explaining each task to Emma as they went about their day. "These are eggs from the chickens," she told the baby as they collected the morning's bounty. "We'll have some for lunch and maybe bake a cake with the rest." Emma responded with delighted squeals, reaching for the warm eggs with determined little hands that Faith gently redirected. As she worked, Faith's mind kept returning to Adam and the decision they were both tacitly making to see if they could build a life together. It seemed improbable, perhaps even foolish, to consider a future with a man she'd known less than a week. Yet Faith couldn't deny the connection that had formed between them, or the way Emma had already claimed a piece of her heart. By mid-afternoon, Faith had baked bread, planted a row of late peas in the garden, and mended a tear in one of her dresses, all with Emma as her attentive audience. The baby was now napping on a blanket in the shade of the porch, allowing Faith a moment to sit and contemplate the changes happening in her life. She was startled from her thoughts by the sound of hoofbeats approaching too many to be just Adam returning. Instinctively, Faith scooped up Emma, who awakened with a surprised whimper, and reached for the rifle she kept by the door. 4 riders were approaching Adam in the lead, followed by Doc Stevens and 2 men Faith recognized from town but couldn't name. She relaxed slightly at the sight of Adam, though her heart still hammered with alarm. "Faith," Adam called as they neared the cabin. "It's all right, these men are here to help," Faith nodded, lowering her rifle but keeping Emma close as the riders dismounted. Adam approached first, his expression a mix of excitement and concern. "I'm sorry to surprise you like this," he said quietly, taking in her anxious posture. "But when I told Doc about the repairs I'd done, he mentioned that old Ben Whitlock has been looking to sell his blacksmith shop in town." Adam's eyes lit with enthusiasm. "It's a good business, Faith, steady work and living quarters above the shop. I went to look at it and it's sound, needs some fixing up but nothing I couldn't handle." Faith blinked, trying to process this information. "A blacksmith shop, but you work with horses." "I trained as a blacksmith too," Adam explained. "Worked as one for 3 years before I met Caroline." He gestured toward the men who were hanging back respectfully. "These gentlemen are from the town council. They've been looking for someone to take over the shop since Ben's arthritis got too bad for him to work." Faith glanced at the waiting men, then back at Adam. "You want to buy the shop, stay in Silver Peak," Adam nodded, his expression growing serious, "if you're agreeable. It would mean we could stay close by, build something here." He looked around at her homestead. "You wouldn't have to leave your land. We could keep both places, live in town during the week for the business, come out here weekends and summers." His voice softened. "It could be the best of both worlds, Faith." The careful thought he'd put into this, the way he'd considered her attachment to her land, made Faith's throat tight with emotion. Before she could respond, Doc Stevens stepped forward, his kind old face creased with a smile. "Miss Blackburn," he greeted her, "I see my little patient has made a full recovery." He nodded toward Emma, who was regarding the visitors with curious eyes. "And I see she's found herself a fine caretaker in the process." Faith flushed, suddenly aware of how this must look to the townspeople, her holding Adam's baby, the two of them clearly on intimate terms after just a few days' acquaintance. But Doc Stevens' smile held no judgment, only warm approval. "The town could use a good blacksmith," he continued. "And a family to occupy that empty shop. Been sitting vacant too long." He gave Faith a meaningful look. "Been thinking for years you should spend more time among folk, Miss Blackburn. Isolation isn't good for the spirit." Faith shifted Emma in her arms, uncomfortably aware of the truth in the old doctor's words. "I've managed well enough." "Managing isn't the same as living," Doc Stevens replied gently. And if I may be so bold, you look more alive today than I've seen you in 5 years. Faith couldn't deny the observation. She felt more alive, more present in her own skin than she had since her family died. In just a few days, Adam and Emma had awakened parts of her she'd thought were gone forever. Adam stepped closer, his voice low for her ears alone. It's just an idea, Faith. Nothing has to be decided today, but I wanted you to know it's a possibility, a way we could make a life here together without you having to give up your home. Faith looked up at him, struck by the care he was taking with her feelings, with her history. This man, who had walked into her life by chance just days ago, understood her better than anyone had in years. Could I see the shop? She asked, surprising herself with the question. Before any decisions are made, Adam's face lit with hope. Of course, whenever you'd like. Doc Stevens stepped forward. No time like the present if you're of a mind. We could escort you into town right now, show you the place while the light's still good. Faith hesitated, looking down at Emma, who was contentedly playing with a button on Faith's dress. The thought of going into town, of being seen and talked about, made her stomach knot with anxiety. Yet she couldn't deny her curiosity about this opportunity. Adam had found this possible future he was envisioning for them. I'd like to see it, she decided, her voice stronger than she felt. Adam's smile was worth the momentary discomfort. I'll saddle Penny for you, he offered, and Emma can ride with me. Within the hour, they were riding toward Silver Peak, Adam and Emma on his buckskin, Faith on Penny, with Doc Stevens and the councilmen leading the way. Faith hadn't been to town in nearly 2 months, and she felt exposed and vulnerable as they rode down the main street. Curious faces peered from shop windows, and pedestrians stopped to stare at the unusual procession. Don't mind them, Adam murmured, riding close beside her. They're just surprised to see you, that's all. Faith nodded, sitting straighter in the saddle. She had done nothing wrong, nothing to be ashamed of. Let them stare. The blacksmith shop stood at the edge of town, a sturdy brick building with a large forge area on the ground floor and living quarters above. As they dismounted and tied their horses, Faith studied the place with a critical eye. It was well built, if a bit neglected, with plenty of room for a business and a small family. Old Ben Whitlock was waiting inside, his gnarled hands resting on a cane. He brightened visibly at the sight of their party. Miss Blackburn, he greeted her with surprised pleasure. Didn't expect to see you today. Come to look at my shop, have you? Faith nodded, suddenly shy. If that's all right, Mr. Whitlock. More than all right, the old man assured her. Been hoping someone worthy would take this place. He looked approvingly at Adam. Your young man here knows his way around a forge. That much was clear when he came by earlier. Faith flushed at the words, your young man, but didn't correct him. Instead, she followed as Ben led them through the shop, pointing out features and telling stories of his 40 years working there. The living quarters upstairs were simple but spacious, a large main room that served as kitchen and living area, 2 bedrooms, and a small room that Ben's late wife had used for sewing. Not fancy, Ben acknowledged, but comfortable. Raised 3 children here with my Martha. Faith moved to the window, looking out at the view of mountains in the distance, the same mountains she could see from her homestead. It was a different perspective, but somehow comforting in its familiarity. What do you think? Adam asked quietly, joining her with Emma in his arms. The baby was looking around with wide, curious eyes, taking in the new surroundings. Faith took a deep breath, trying to imagine it living here with Adam and Emma, running a business in town, becoming part of the community again after so many years of self-imposed isolation. It was terrifying. And yet, it's a good place, she said softly. Solid, room to grow. Adam's expression warmed with hope. That's what I thought too, he bounced Emma gently. What do you think, little lady? Could you see us making a home here? Emma gurgled happily, reaching out toward Faith with eager hands. Faith took her automatically, settling the baby on her hip in a gesture that already felt natural. She approves, Adam said with a smile that made Faith's heart flutter. They thanked Ben for the tour and rejoined Doc Stevens and the councilman downstairs. The discussion turned to business matters, the price of the shop, the current clientele, the needs of the town. Faith listened quietly, watching Adam engage with the men with confidence and thoughtfulness. He was good with people, she realized, respectful but not deferential, knowledgeable without being arrogant. People would trust him, would bring him their business and their horses. As they prepared to leave, Doc Stevens drew Faith aside. "He's a good man, Miss Blackburn," the doctor said quietly. "Don't see many like him these days, especially not ones willing to take on raising a baby alone." He patted her arm gently. "Don't let fear keep you from happiness, my dear. Life's too short for that." Faith nodded, unable to find words to respond to the kind but direct advice. As they rode back to her homestead, she was quiet, her mind whirling with possibilities and uncertainties. Adam respected her silence, riding beside her with Emma securely held against his chest. The baby had fallen asleep, lulled by the steady motion of the horse. Back at the cabin, as the sun began to set, Faith finally found her voice. They were sitting on the porch, watching the golden light fade from the western sky. Emma was asleep inside, exhausted from the day's adventures. "It would be a big change," she said quietly. "Living in town, being around people again." Adam nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It would, but not all at once, if that's what you're worried about. We could ease into it, stay here most of the time at first, just go into town for business hours." He reached for her hand. "And you'd always have this place, Faith, your sanctuary whenever you needed it." Faith looked out over her land, the garden she'd tended, the barn her father had built, the fields where she'd learned to ride as a child. It was her history, her roots. The thought of leaving it, even part-time, created a pang of anxiety in her chest. But then she thought of the shop in town, of the possibilities it represented. A business to build, a community to rejoin, a future with Adam and Emma that extended beyond these few acres. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been so long since I've let myself care about anyone. What if—" She swallowed hard. "What if I lose you too?" Adam's hand tightened around hers. "I can't promise nothing will ever happen to me or to Emma," he said honestly. "Life doesn't offer those guarantees." His voice softened. "But I can promise that whatever time we have, whether it's years or decades, will be fuller and richer than if we let fear keep us apart." Faith looked at him, this man who had appeared at her door with a sick baby and an honest plea just days ago. How quickly he had become essential to her, how completely he and Emma had rearranged her carefully ordered world. "I want to try," she said finally, the words emerging with surprising firmness. "I want to see if we can make a life together here in town, wherever it leads us." Adam's face lit with joy, his blue eyes shining in the fading light. "That's all I'm asking for, Faith, a chance to try together." He leaned toward her and Faith met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that felt like a promise, like a beginning. When they parted, Adam rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her face. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Faith Blackburn," he whispered. "Have been since that first night when you took us in despite your better judgment." Faith closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted, the truth of it both frightening and exhilarating. "You and Emma both." Adam's kiss this time was deeper, filled with emotion and promise. Faith gave herself to it completely, letting go of the fear that had governed her for so long. Inside the cabin, Emma began to cry, her timing impeccable. Adam laughed softly against Faith's lips. "Duty calls," he murmured. Faith smiled, standing and pulling him to his feet. "Let's go to her," she said. "Together." Adam's answering smile was everything Faith hadn't known. She was missing warmth and hope and the promise of a future she hadn't dared imagine. As they walked hand in hand into the cabin, their cabin now, in a way it hadn't been before Faith realized that the walls she'd built around her heart hadn't been protection at all. They had been a prison, keeping her from the very things that made life worth living: connection, family, love. It had taken a giant cowboy with a baby and a desperate plea to show her that. And as Emma's cries turned to happy gurgles at the sight of them both entering the room, Faith knew with certainty that opening her door that night, opening her heart, had been the most courageous and rewarding decision of her life. The future stretched before them, full of possibilities and challenges they would face together. Faith didn't know exactly what it would hold, but for the first time in 5 years, she was eager to find out, eager to live, not just survive, with Adam and Emma by her side. For a woman who had lived alone for years, it was a new beginning, one that had started with a simple request for shelter for just one night, and had blossomed into the promise of a lifetime of nights and days shared with the family she had unexpectedly found when she needed it most.